Welcome, dear Aerin and dear Bayo. Now we meet across many, many time zones. Aerin is in Mexico and Bayo is in India, and we are in the middle here in Turkey. I'm very grateful that it worked out, that we could work the times out somehow. So for Aerin, it's early morning in Mexico, in Oaxaca, and for our dear Bayo, it's very late in India. It's 11 p.m. Uh, so thank you so much. We are greeting the day on one hand, and we are saying good night to the day on the other end. And it feels very special to meet like this. Aerin and Bayo and I, we go, well, with Aerin, we go way back. I don't know the original time anymore, but there's at least 15 years between us, having met in really beautiful and inspiring community meetings and gatherings. And then with Bayo, I think we met in Turkey when you came for the Giftable. And then from then on, the connections and mischievous endeavors started happening between all of us. So I welcome you. Thank you for accepting our invitation to speak about grief this evening. And I'm really eager to hear from you and about how this, I'm curious how this conversation will unfold. But I want to first let you introduce yourselves briefly to our audience here. Mostly people from Turkey are listening, tuning in tonight, although the recording will be available to a wider audience after the festival.
Thank you. Thank you, Filiz. Bio, I wanted you to go first in case you fall asleep, but I will begin. My name is Aerin Dunford. I am originally from the United States, from Salt Lake City, Utah. And I've been living here in the south of Mexico for the last 15 years. So definitely feel very rooted to these lands, the traditions of the highly indigenous state that I live in. Um, and every day I'm a different person. So let's see, who am I today? Um, Yeah, I'm feeling really connected to my animal self in this moment more than my kind of anthropomorphic identification. I love connecting people and ideas, and I'd say at the center of everything that I do, all of my passion and labor and commitment is really about relationality. And so creating the conditions in which the connections that we have with ourselves, with each other, with the more than human, the other creatures and entities can grow deeper and stronger and more profound. Yeah, I feel quite convinced that for whatever is coming in these times, being able to rely on deeper and more rich and complex relationalities will support us. So that feels very alive for me and very much connected to the subject of this festival right now. Yeah, it's about to be the Day of the Dead here in Mexico. So we're putting up our altar and getting the photos of our deceased out. Um, and I'm also the mother of Raphael, our son who died in utero at the end of my pregnancy 6 years ago. And so that is such a key piece of my own grief story and journey. and changed my life and who I am. And I'm yeah, looking forward because Rafa will come and visit us this Friday. So preparing our house to welcome him back home. Pass it to you, my brother.
Good to be with my sisters here. Filiz, I think the last time we met was maybe a conference in India or something. I don't know. In Bangalore, I think. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You are, and you will remain unmistakably my sister for decades to come. And it's good to be with you here too. Aerin and I were made in the same womb together. I think you can notice the resemblance. We are siblings for life. Our work is tied to each other for life. And I'm thrilled to be in this conversation with her. The way that I want to enter this conversation is not to speak to what defines me in terms of titles or relationships, though those are very close, always close to me. The way that I want to enter is to refer to something that my people say. I'm from Nigeria, and the Yoruba people are very, very synonymous with carnivals and festivals and, finding strange ways out of trouble. Let me put it that way. They have a proverb, a saying: in order to find your way, you must become lost. In order to find your way, you must become lost. Some of the most specific vocations that enable and inspire and nourish my voice today is the strange grace and prospects and promise of getting lost together. Because I'm concerned about climate chaos. I'm concerned about the decline of trust within our societies. I'm concerned about the rising tide and the prospects of fascistic regimes. I'm concerned with Gaza and genocide and apartheid relations. And I'm concerned, even more than all of these things, that the ways that we respond to these troubles, the ways we respond are the troubles gaining intelligence. So speaking about grief for me is speaking to this Yoruba notion of becoming lost together, of finding new worlds together. It's through Rafa, it's through grieving, it's through holding our bodies in a particular way. And that's how I want to show up in conversation, the spirit guiding my participation in this beautiful sibling, this restoration of siblinghood, is that we are not alone, that Rafa is with us, that ancestors are with us, and stranger blessings of different kinds of futures are with us. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming into this conversation in your own unique ways. And I right away want to jump on something that you said, Bayo, and I couldn't catch it properly, but you said you are troubled with the way we respond to the troubles, gaining intelligence. You said something like, can you unfold that a little bit?
Okay. A lot of our, can I use the word presuppositions? I guess I can. A lot of our assumptions about the way the world works have been premised on the idea that we humans have agency, have responsibility. We are distinct from the environment, from other animals, from furniture, from things around us. We're kind of like cosmic orphans, right? We are divorced from the things that support us because we're superior to them, right? We make AI, we make rocket ships, we make furniture, and all the while, we think that we are above the world, right? Most of our activisms proceed from that philosophy, that ideology, that we can act upon the world, and the world is just a mute recipient of our activism, of our actions. But something, I'm going to put it in a poetic way that need not be historicized. Something has been happening that has brought to attention the fact that we're not as unique as we think we are, that we're not as exclusive, we're not as cut out, we're not as well put together as we think we are. That when we act with the world. In fact, there is no acting that is not with the world. When we feel with the world, which is just my way of saying this, that when we act and when we do stuff, we can no longer suffer under the illusion that we are acting from a place of purity. I'm a philosopher against purity, right? I cannot act from a place of recognizing that the ideas I have are in my head and they are inseminating the world with wisdom. Rather, we are noticing that our technologies have effects on us, that our food has effects on us, that microbes have effects on us, that we are not at the beginning of the line of agency. We're somewhere in the middle, and we've always been in the middle. So this is some very roundabout way of saying that we don't and cannot fix the world. And we must let go of the idea that we're acting from a place of purity. This is what I mean then, that sometimes the way we act is just the action becoming stronger. Sometimes our attempts to find solutions to problems is how the problem gains life, right? It's how the problem stretches itself. It's how the problem whispers in our ears and says, do this so you can get rid of me. You can slit my throat. You can get rid of me once and for all. But immediately we pick up the axe to save the day. The problem finds wings. Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to add, Aerin, to this?
I just kind of want to sit with that for a moment, the problem finding its wings. I think all that I will add as you were speaking, Bayo, I was thinking about complicity and how tied to this notion of purity is often a desire that I feel in myself, to not want to be complicit. But we are. And someone recently said that to me about a kind of group conflict rupture. And I was saying, I feel preoccupied about being complicit in this. And he said to me immediately, you are, and we are. And so how are we maybe asking the question, how are we also the problem in this way of thinking, right? But just the entanglement and the imbrication that we have with the challenges and the crises that we face. And I think there's another side to this, which is also not to feel shame about that, and not to feel that individually we have to carry some, shameful or guilty conscious. It's just more about learning new ways to be with the fact that we are complicit, that we are not pure. And something about that is making me think about religion a lot as well, which also sort of brings in, to tie it into grief, and even to death, the way that our uh, dominant culture relationship to these topics, which tend to be quite taboo or they have their own way of being addressed, in my experience, creates the conditions for hiding, or feeling shameful about our tears or our grief, or it's not socially acceptable. So, yeah, there's some interesting links between these different explorations.
Mm, mm.
So how are we then to approach this work of grief? In some of the some of my elders that I studied with about grief, there is this idea that grief is a doorway. It's an initiation into a deeper life. It could be a gateway of transformation, of coming apart, and maybe freeing ourselves from whoever thought we were, and then gaining some new depths in life. At the same time, I also learned or studied that it's not something passive. So grief isn't equal to like sorrow. Grief isn't an emotion. Grief is a whole, it's a mystery. Just before we say anything about it, it's a great mystery. It's part of the great mysteries of life and this world. But also it is some kind of agency that we come into. So it's not something like just laying down passively and being overrun by it, although that is part of it too. But as far as I understand, it's about cultivating a certain agency to dance with grief. And so, Bayo, what's your take on that? So it's not, I'm trying to get clear here what I'm trying to ask, but maybe something already.
Yeah, something landed already. We don't need to talk that much. There's a generosity here that precedes eloquence, right? And what I have to say is what Aerin is already saying beautifully. In fact, I wondered why you would put Aerin and I in conversation. We would just say the same things. When I was a kid, I lost my dad, and my dad was my best friend, right? I lost him at a young age. And my loss inspired me to want to study clinical neuropsychology. Because I felt that I needed to explain my sorrow, right? I needed to get a handle on this incredibly vivacious thing that had ruled my life and had captured me. If I could explain it, I could get around it. It was almost the same way that I doubled down on my faith as a Christian, which I no longer identify with, but I also felt if I can understand theology and master it and apologetics and read philosophy and read Charles Finney and Asa Mahan and, Thoreau and all these philosophers. If I could do that, then I could gain mastery over the world and stop this from ever affecting me like it affected me. I was trying to get around grief. I was 15 when my father died. I was a very 15 sociopathic nerd. 15-year-old sociopathic nerd. Yes. Well, Aerin, you know this. I didn't have friends. I just had books. So after a while, I started to learn in small doses, and I'll just get to the point, that my grief wasn't my own, right? That like you said so beautifully, grief is not an emotion. Grief is an affect. And the word affect is used by theorists to describe the capacity to be in relationship with. I'll say that again. The capacity to be in relationship with. That is not the same thing as emotionality. That's not the same thing as feeling. It's something different, right? I started to study cross-cultural performances of grief, the ways that grief was performed in my world, as against the way that grief was pathologized in the West. As some of us may know, in the Bible for clinical psychology, grief is a sickness, especially if it's felt over time, over a year. So Americans have the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's in its 5th iteration. The British people have the ICD-10 or 11. I'm not sure what iteration it is in now. But in the DSM manual, there is a diagnostic criterion. There is a diagnostic element called prolonged grief disorder. And it said,
our translator may not know what DSM manual is. Is it?
It's what I just described. It's the manual. It's the Bible for clinical psychologists and psychotherapists, right? It's what we look into to make ourselves feel good. Right? I'm just kidding. And I don't mean to dismiss that art form, right? But the DSM, which is this Bible, describes grief as some aspects of grief as prolonged grief disorder. If you're grieving for more than a year, then there's something wrong with you. You're likely to be incarcerated or drugged or something else along those lines, right? And that worries me, okay? Because I don't think grief is, especially coming from my cultural perspective, I don't think grief is something happening in our brains. I think our brains, our bodies modulate grief, but grief is already a flow in the environment. Grief is, like you say, a mystery. The shape of it, we cannot tell, right? I like to think about grief as modernity's outside, okay? Modernity's outside within. I'm using the phrasing of a philosopher called Maurice Blanchot, and he talks about the outside. The outside is not my outside, which is very noisy now, but the outside is this idea of an incompleteness, a radical incompleteness that cannot be complete. It's like grief is the incompleteness of creation. It's like the loss that everything feels. Is that when anything shows up in the world, it comes with its own intelligence of loss, right? But we don't know how to hold loss, right? We're not built to hold loss in the ways that modernity has manufactured us. So we name it a sickness. We say, stay over there. We don't know how to deal with it. And that's why grief, I describe grief as an immigrant, a migrant. It's like a nomad. right? It's dirty looking. We don't like the way it looks. But when it passes through, there's something about when it passes through that is compelling. And let me just take a pause here to say that I don't think we are, the way Aerin was speaking about, I want to just piggyback on that, what she was saying about complicity. So even the ways that we speak about it is very legalistic. It derives from a Christocentric fundamentalism, a way of seeing everyone as individual, responsible, independent, isolated, and fundamental, right? I think we don't have responsibility. I think we are co-responsive. Co-responsivity is different from responsibility. Responsibility presumes that I have it and you have it, but we're separate. But co-responsivity means that there's something sweeping through this place right now. And to some degree, some of us are feeling it, but it is not either of us that owns it. None of us owns this. We are only open to it. And I think I want to see grief as this fugitive wind that blows through a village and upsets the ways that it arranges itself.
Mm.
There's so many images there to take in. I like the way you, it's not about defining, but it's giving imagery to it that gives us some sensations and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Aerin, are there any images with you that come alive through Bayo's imagery?
Mm-hmm. The image that actually came to me when you were first speaking, Felice, about how grief is not an emotion was actually grief as a landscape, or an atmosphere, maybe. And yeah, I think what I've experienced personally is that there is this portal that can open up. This sounds kind of new agey, but like different dimensions and ways of being that collectively allow us to connect more with this place that's been shunned and taboo, as we have been, as Bayo says, like manufactured within a hyper individualistic modern Western way of thinking. And so the experience of grief can be so disorienting and shocking, And so my personal experience, obviously, going through stillbirth, especially at the very end of a pregnancy, it was so incredibly, yeah, it was just sideswiped, because the expectation is that we're going to have this brand new baby. And instead, we were left with this incredible absence, and this absence as presence. And what happened for me a few days after the birth of Rafa was the stillbirth of Rafa was feeling this vocation of like, this kind of affect is deeply needed in our times. I think that's where there's this connection between our lack of ability to be open, right? To be open to this fugitive wind or this new landscape that actually creates the conditions in which we can relate to ourselves and to the other and to community, to grief itself in a different way, and have some, I feel like it's so hard to walk through our worlds today without feeling pain and grief. And at the same time, many of us, especially those of us from a Western context, haven't been given the tools, haven't ever learned, as in some of the more the less clinically inclined cultures that had these beautiful ceremonies and rituals for honoring that this is just a natural, it's a mysterious but natural part of life. And maybe natural isn't the best word, but that it's here with us. It's an entity that's present, and pushing it into a corner and relegating it to the shadows or pathologizing it and making it a disease isn't supportive of the times that we're traveling through right now, because there is plenty to grieve on every level. And the last piece I'll share, when we were talking about this conversation, Bayo used a different metaphor that stayed with me and I've shared with others, which is kind of how grief may be this thing that is like a pit stop on the racetrack. And the racetrack is modernity. Racetrack is like the sort of dominant system of like perfectionism and you know growth and goal setting and being successful, all of these values that are so present for us in modernity. And grief just takes us off that track, And I've been thinking about, and then what? And what I've been playing with, the idea I've been contemplating a bit and working with is like, what if from that pit stop, there's actually kind of a portal into another space of collectivity where we continue to walk with that grief. And we allow it, we open ourselves to be transformed by it collectively. So that's just another metaphor that I've been really fascinated by in the last few weeks since we first talked.
Mm. Yeah. You both, Bayo, you have your roots in Yoruba culture with a very strong, deep culture there, indigenous culture, if I use the word correctly now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've had this whole worldwide experience of living in the Western, the white modernity, as we
Mhm.
named it. And then, Aerin, you are from the States, and then you've been living in Oaxaca for 15 years. So you have real contact, I imagine, with the
Ebony and Ivory.
Sorry, how?
Aerin and I have a theme song. It's Ebony and Ivory. You know that song?
No.
Ebony.
But
Okay, skip that.
So, I mean, and also I am noticing your use of the world, not you say worlds, the worlds,
Yeah.
and I came across that in your writing as well. So how do you guys navigate these different worlds, and how can we all navigate through these worlds, and how can we learn from without, there's I had told you the story, if you remember in our conversation. I have met these, I came across the grief work and rituals in the States when I was traveling, when I was doing a pilgrimage. In fact, I met Francis Weller. He had studied with Malidome
Martin
Som.
Brechtel. Oh, and Tomei.
Maldon.
Yeah, they've had done rituals together for a long time. And then I have learned about these Dagara people's grief ritual. And Francis mentored me for a short while, and then I started, like, here I am, in the 21st century, um, a, privileged white woman. We have our also whiteness in this country.
Mhm. Mhm.
So not having had close contact with any deep culture in my, family or where I
Mhm.
was raised. And then I meet this ritual, through the, from hand to hand, it's being transferred, like transmitted or gifted to the West. Then I take it and bring it here, and I've been offering it. And it feels very awkward to be
Mm.
doing. At the same time, it's like home, this ritual. I've already done it several times on this land with groups of people from Turkey and also international groups. And it seems to work. So, but there's always the risk of like appropriation. What is it? What is appropriation? What is not? And then you had said something beautiful, Bayo, about, I cannot now phrase it, but maybe you remember when I had said that, you had said, it's somehow beautiful that these traditions, lineages are also, I don't know, being woven together. So
Well, I don't know what I said then, but I know what I would say now. And I think it's equally interesting.
I bet it is.
And I smiled immediately, not knowing where you were going with that. But my sense of things with that specific topic in mind is every culture is a mistake.
Mhm.
Oh,
Right. Right. It's we I think one of the risks of um, social analysis is that it often tends to become um, stuck on itself, and it doesn't flow with the world in its movements. It becomes iconographic, it becomes codified, frozen, and it's unable to really move and meet the world. It's unable to be responsive. It's impervious to how the world is shifting.
what do you mean by social analysis?
Critique, social critique, like how we speak about capitalism, for instance, how we say down with capitalism, which is a prestigious thing to say, while raising one finger, I think. Down with capitalism, right? We say it all the time. But then, and I was sharing this example with some friends earlier on today. There are these oil rigs somewhere in Los Angeles, in Santa Barbara, I think, off the coast, in the water, and activists have been saying down with these oil rigs for decades. And then people who observed the pipes going into the water realized that the pipes had become a sanctuary for the fish. That the very thing that they were trying to remove had become this strange home, had become this strange sanctuary for the thing that they were trying to protect them from, which suggests to me that the world is promiscuous, that the world is flowing, that the world cannot be conceived as a thing, a background, or nature in the ways that the Enlightenment project taught us to think about nature, something to save, something to put in a museum and pat on the cheeks.
Environment.
Yes, let's save the environment. There's something objectifying, externalizing about that. It's like taking a snapshot of a river and then thinking that you have the river in the snapshot. But the river is unhavable. It cannot be had, right? Cultural appropriation is well intentioned in its analysis. It wants to stop the violence of, or address the violence of certain dominant cultures pilfering, extracting, and oppressing minority cultures, at least within that space of encounter. And it happens all the time. What it leaves out of its analysis, though, is that there is no culture that is not already syncretic. Syncretic means already a mix of others, right? It's not like there is Yoruba culture, Hausa culture, Oaxaca culture. That provincial way of seeing the world as a collection of already made things obscures too much. It leaves out too much. It leaves out the fact that the world is an ongoing researching of itself. For instance, I'm from the Yoruba people, but the Yoruba people did not get their names from themselves. The very word Yoruba is a foreign language. It's amazing, right? That our name that we have for ourselves is not from ourselves. Maybe that's the reason why the Yoruba spirituality thrived in the diasporic world. Maybe why Ifa, Orisha, and all that became the dominant Afro spirituality during slavery. It's because we already knew how to be beside ourselves. We already knew how to be away from home while at home. Does that make sense? So it's like cultural appropriation is a useful tool, but like every other tool, it can only cut in a particular way. It cannot hold the weight and the burden of a poetic world that has no final shape. So that's why I say every culture is a mistake. Every culture is a glitch of something else. Every culture is constantly unfurling, becoming other in how it researches the world.
Oaxaca is also not the Zapotec word for the name of this place. Interesting.
Really?
No, in Zapotec, Oaxaca is Lula. Yeah. And it makes me ask, like, because I also think obviously with the situation of migration, particularly for Oaxacans, I think Fresno, California has more Oaxacans in it than the capital of Oaxaca.
Yeah.
And that capacity, I mean, it actually makes me wonder about this exploration of migration as well and exile,
Yeah.
and how that, how as culture in the form of these masses of people travel,
Mm-hmm.
then the very thing that is the culture is morphing and shape-shifting constantly. And there's just this mixing of culture that creates new hybrids, I guess, of culture all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Your story is beautiful, Felice. I think meeting and Francis, I mean, Francis is an amazing being.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he carries that wisdom, not only from the Dagara tradition of grief rituals, but he told this story um, in a talk I went to with him. I think it's a Scandinavian culture, maybe Norway. I don't remember. But that when someone in these traditional communities in Scandinavia suffered a loss, um, they would sleep by the fire for like a month. And in the fire, like not the fire itself, but the ashes of the fire, when the fire went out, the grieving person would sleep in the ashes. And so then that person would be covered with ash, and they would walk around the village covered with ash so that people could see their grief. And then the way that Francis pulls that in and is able to talk about it in a way that gets across to people in the West is just gorgeous, and create the sense of the village in a place that is totally cut off from our roots, our orphan wisdom ways of being. Um, so I just also think like there's this braiding of bringing in traditions and practicing together, not in a way to remain pure or faithful or loyal, because that also feels quite dogmatic. And I think that ritual or ceremony, when it's done in a hollow way, can lose its potency. And so
Mm-hmm.
cultural appropriation in a way is a constant reanimating of practice and making it relevant for the context in which we find ourselves.
Mm. Maybe I'll add this to that as well. That grief is often the vector that carries the desire of encounter, right? Grief was the bodies that were taken from Africa, whether it's from the Bight of Benin or the Bight of Biafra or the Gold Coast or Slave Coast, the bodies that were transported over 400 years were not per se transported in wooden vessels, at least not exclusively. They were transported in grief. And this grief was ritual. This grief was how, Aerin was just a while ago trying to understand how we might break out of the racetrack, right? It's that there comes a time when settlement, when civilization, when our projects of completion, where our models of being, where our images of ourselves become so full and exhausted that there's no place, there's nothing else to do. It seems we've run out of space and spaciousness. And when that happens, when things get so solid, in my view, the first responders are cracks, right? When everything gets solid, the first thing that shows up are the ripples, the tensions that are already in there, the cracks. And those cracks are invitations of loss, right? In my view, grief is how the future loves us. Grief is how desire meets the unknown. Except the racetrack is quite adept, quite skilled at getting you back into the race, right? Mm-hmm. And the way it does that is with a machine. Deleuze, philosopher, will call this a paranoid machine. Don't translate that. But but the idea is the corporation will offer you vacation. Take some time out to grieve. 1 week, 2 weeks. We'll be here. We'll be waiting for you, right? There's always the prospect of grieve and return back to normal. Here's a pandemic, and then millions of lives lost, people dying. And the dominant narrative that starts to spill from that is we need to get back to normal, right? It's as if every time we pray for transformation, grief shows up. But we don't know how to handle grief. So we lock it up and then we get back to normal. And then we complain and wonder why things aren't changing.
So do you think we're there yet as humanity? I mean, the cracks are there, but we must have not. I mean, we had a pandemic for almost 3 years in some places. Some places, I mean, everywhere in the world, it lasted in different lengths, in different parts of the world, I want to say. But still, there was such a big deal. And then again, okay, we don't know what to do with the grief. So we go back as normal as possible. So what will it take, do you think, for those cracks to become the portals we need to go through?
I don't think there is a humanity in the presence of grief. There's something about grief and the way that it shows up. When the outside or the monster shows up, it upsets the ways that we understand ourselves, others around us, and the future. It disrupts everything. Like there's something about the posture of grief that makes easy analysis impossible. Maybe that's why our eyes get cloudy, and maybe that's why we shrink into a fetal position. It's like the posture becomes one of demise, one of slow down here, instead of one of philosophical certainty or certitude, right? So I think that I don't know how to trust the category of humanity any longer in the face of Gaza. I don't know how to trust those easy categories. I don't know how to think about that modern narrative of we are marching to the glorious future. You know, it has never been the case that there was an easy we here, because this we was always racialized. Not all of us have had access to the human, right?
What do you mean by that?
I mean that the human is a political vocation that is indebted to the transatlantic slave trade and is, by the very operations of its imperatives, a sorting out of those who have access and those who do not have access. The human is not me. This is a distraction. The human is an ecology, or like Aerin said earlier, a field. That's the human. It's an ongoing historical, spiritual, biological, political, architectural vocation. And remember that the slave ship had different levels. The top level were the white slavers. The middle were black bodies. The lower case was the resources that they were transporting. That's the human for me. The human has never been uniform, already there, right? So grief doesn't come to introduce violence. Grief comes to show us the violence of the normative. That is the violence that is already here with you. That's what monsters do. Grief is monstrous. When it shows up, it's not like it comes with its violence. It's that it comes in and is like, guys, look at yourselves. You are not well put together, right? You're not as straight as you think you are. You're not as loyal as you think you are. You're broken. And it's okay. So maybe I'll add to that I'm happy we don't know what to do with grief. That might sound counterintuitive. Because if we knew what to do with grief, we will make it an industry. And when we make it an industry, it will become the new institution. And then we'll make standards out of it. Grief is a minor thing. It doesn't come like, the steady thing we think it comes as. It always comes and it upsets. It's the upset of what we already know. And that calls for, in my view, a different kind of politics, a different kind of playfulness. Because when you're facing something that resists confidence, the thing to do is not to try to gain mastery over it, as I was taught that I could do. The thing to do is to play with it, is to approach it, is to press this and let it press you in return, right? It's to try to speak with it and listen. We will fail many times, but that's how care happens. Care is not uniform, necessarily positive. Care can be dangerous. The slave plantation was a form of care, right? Because care is the organization of bodies. It's just that we have learned that it is a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing or good thing. It's just how bodies are organized. And sometimes care can become carceral. It can become choking, and we don't know what to do with it. When care becomes a chokehold, the thing to do is to seek out the cracks. That's a politics. That's something different. Different.
I feel like I'm still back a ways in this conversation with something that you said, and I won't remember the exact words, Bio, um, but it really had something to do with, because when I have thought about grief in the past, it's like all of these terrible things that we see happening in the world and within ourselves, in our relationships, in our families, um, they cause grief. But the way that I'm actually and that being able to navigate and lean in and embrace that is something that has felt really important to me. But I am hearing you talking about grief as almost like this other entity, right? It is something that it's almost like a spirit that's taking us in a way. And when we're open to it, it passes through us and it can um yeah, it feels like there's like an alchemical shift that might happen. And
Mm,
so I'm really like your question, Felice, are we there yet? I think we will never be there. I think that
mm,
this is part of the challenge of particularly these days when there's so much talk about healing and about trauma and about integration. And some of these, I've just become troubled by some of these concepts because so many of them seem to point to a finality where, someday humanity will get there, or someday we're all going to be healed, or someday we're going to integrate in all those craggly, ugly. And no, we are always going to be in a process of becoming. Even if we don't exist as a species anymore, our compost will still be becoming, And so I think it's really interesting to think about grief as, yeah, almost like a spirit or something that takes us and that we can continue to be open to as we journey through our lives. So that's just new for me, and I really appreciated that image. Yeah, thank you, Bio.
thank you, Erin. That was beautiful to sit with, to yeah.
So wait, you mean we're not going to ascend altogether in the near future?
I think we've missed the plane. We're late.
Sorry, I'm not, I don't mean to
Yeah.
insult anybody's vision about the future, but I think this was my own kind of entering my not necessarily pessimistic and uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I 20 years ago when I set on this journey of becoming more aware of myself and of the story we live in the world, there was this light at the end of the tunnel for me. I mean, Aerin, you remember those days? We were kind of together in some of those, visionary meetings, and um, I feel so much more. The word is like sober, but I mean, that was real back then. But after 20, 30 years, 30 years, 20 years, which is like a blip in the
Mm.
timeline of great cycles, I feel so differently. And I feel more like what we're talking about, how we
Mm.
talk now. But was it my naivete of a young age, my idealism, or was that the era and the zeitgeist is now different? What do you feel?
Mm. Well, I just want to say that I mean, I don't think that it was real, but I now, so much of this for me has been about kind of being able to become aware of where my thinking and my outlook or cosmovision of the world, my kind of like ontological training, being able to have more distance from that and say, like, this was part of the culture of that time, of that community. And now I can see things differently, and I value different things. It doesn't make one of those right and one of them's wrong. It's just more around, for me, this is actually something really important of like, where do we place our attention? And so in that time, and up until pretty recently, there was this idea of like transformation and transcendence and ascension, and we're going to get over all of this stuff, you know, that kind of has a lot of deeply religious
Yeah.
connotations as well. But I feel like where I am now, and I think that the grief and my own experience and story is like, we need to descend. We have to go down, you know, into the compost, under the earth, and into those cracks. And there's actually just so much beauty in in that black earth, deep compost, allowing things to fall apart that has very little to do with the energy of ascension and overcoming. And because we become part of that, we're not above it. You know, our compost of our bodies will nourish that black earth, you know. So that's just where my interest is now. I remember our mutual friend Nuno years ago, maybe 5 years ago, uh, found this article about the worlds that exist under the surface of the earth. We don't even know. We have no idea. And so, yes, like space and Mars and moon, but what's below our feet is such a mystery. It's kind of like grief, you know, in a way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Maybe just to add to that, I would say, yeah. So the story of ascension and overcoming, that story isn't less true than
No.
what we're saying right now, right? It's not less true. And what we're saying right now about descending and black earth and fugitivity and grieving isn't more true. What I would have us notice is that we don't know the way the Enlightenment project, and we do this all the time, we just don't know we're thinking with this ideology, is that what Enlightenment did was to colonize knowledge as subservient to truth. I'll say that again. The Enlightenment colonized knowledge as subservient to truth. That is, if we are not moving along a timeline of increasing sophistication towards the correct answer, then then you're on the wrong timeline, or you're not knowing well, right? And that is a very, very linear way of thinking. Like, people don't know in that way. For instance, the people who are peddling conspiracy theories, right? On online about whatever, this politician or that politician, the ways that we often see them is to tell them, do your research. If you do your research, if you know the truth, then you see that you're wrong. But that already presupposes that people are in the business of trafficking with rightness or wrongness. But that's not why we engage in knowing. We engage in knowing because we're trafficking complexity. We're moving in a world that is too complex. We're navigating all of that. And that doesn't lend itself to what we call truth all the time. So my sense of things here is that story of ascension, that specific example, was what you needed then. That was what you needed to navigate that space that you were in that time. And you were not wrong for doing it. You were just situated. And to be situated is to know in a particular way, right? It might be getting difficult to talk like that now, though, because the times are changing and we are realizing, all our projects of ascension haven't panned out. Maybe the promise isn't in the stars, so to speak. Maybe it's in the depths. Maybe it's not even in the depths. Maybe it's in the sprawl. Maybe maybe talking about healing can only go so far. Maybe there is some gift in decomposition. Maybe grieving is a fugitive zigzagging line away from the plantation that has held us.
Well, I have been descent oriented actually for a while. The ascension thing was a joke, but even in the descent, like,
the ascension was a joke. Don't let the ascensionists hear you.
But even with the orientation towards descent and towards the more well, quote unquote, darker aspects of humanity and a human life, and but there was still I was attached to an outcome of, and I am still attached to an outcome. Even with grief, I will go through grief because it will transform me. We will go through grief as humanity because it's an initiation. And I'm still very much, there is an anticipation, even if it's not expectation. Maybe 20 years ago, it was a more, distinct kind of goal-oriented, progression I had. Now it's not so distinct, but there is still an anticipation, a deep hope that all this trouble, all this pain and suffering will lead us through something better. I don't know. Yeah.
And I love that, Filiz. And some of us need to have that. The world isn't monolithic. The world isn't one. Some of us need to do that. Some others cannot do that. Some others cannot traffic in those kinds of... I shared a story once about sitting in a place with a woman who told me that she was fostering right relationship with the world around her. She said to herself that she said to me that she wanted right relationship with everything as much as she could. And I didn't understand what she meant by right relationship. So I said, could you give me an example of this? She said, for instance, I want right relationship with my phone, right? And I said, hey, tell me about that. And she started to speak about what that meant, maybe curating the amount of hours she spends on the phone, using the app consciously, something like that. And I said, that's fine, but what does your right relationship say about the Congolese children who have to go into mines to dig out the cobalt to make your phone possible? And she had no words. She didn't know what to say about that. And that reminds me over and over again that specific moralities are subsidized by suffering elsewhere. The specific hopes and dreams and aspirations and visions for the future are actively held by creolized bodies. And this is not to put any of this in a space of some kind of privilege, or I don't speak that way, but to suggest that the outcomes that you are dedicated to might be very much what we need as a species. But it is also the case that we often need the non-legibility. By non-legibility, that is the unspeakability. That is, there's some aspect of the world that will not be spoken, that will not be clear, that will not be available, right? That will not be hoped for. right? It's like the slaves arrive being put on a slave ship and they don't know where they're going. It was impossible to ask them. Imagine a journalist interviewing those slaves on board and saying, so what's your hope for the future? They didn't know what the next minute looked like. It's only here in the grieving of that moment that was possible. There was no conception of a future. Some of them had to jump off the ships in the burden of that ritual of grief. So I'm trying to say here that the world is uneven in how it produces futures. It will enlist some of us to craft eloquent visions, and it will enlist others to be silent. And it's all welcome. It's all welcome. It's all good. Carry that vision, hold it, nourish it. But there might come a time when it needs to die. And then the question would be, would you be prepared to bury it and let it go? And would you be open to sitting in the non-legibility of silence, where there is no vision possible because your eyes are filled with tears? And so clarity is not possible.
Well, that is exactly the nature of grief. And,
Yes. Yes.
And apprenticing to it, as we had said. Francis says apprenticing to sorrow, but here in Turkey we used it as apprenticing to grief, being a student, being an apprentice of grief, of exactly how you described it, Bayo. Just aware of time, and before we finish this, I would like you to talk about the monsters. Monster gathering, the festival. So please, it's like we have talked about it and the conception of it, conceiving of it. Is that the right word? Months ago. So now it's happening next week, I think. So let's say it's the brother sibling festival.
Yeah.
What is your invitation with the
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things we haven't talked about is Bayo seeded and initiated we call it an organism at this point, a network called the Emergence Network in 2016. Now we're called 10. And I'm currently the lead weaver there, and about 8
Aerin is
months.
my boss.
EJ is your boss, but I'm like, I'm the manager.
Yeah.
No. So about 8 months ago, we knew that we wanted to start doing more public offerings, and I just kind of had this moment of, Bayo has been talking more about grief in the last year. I would say that there have been more public conversations, and you've done more writing around grief, and endings, and yeah. And I thought, why don't we create a festival around these same topics that you all have been exploring these last days, grief and death and endings, and how we navigate and different practices that we can experiment with to move through these. Yeah, I don't even want to call it, and now thinking of grief as this other entity so that we can move with and be open to that entity. And so it's called Becoming Monster, with this idea that the monster is also like grief, the
yeah, she dropped out. Okay. She'll be back, I'm sure, but until then, would you want to speak to it, Bayo?
Yeah, it's Aerin can speak to the logistical, organizational aspects of it. I would just say this about this beautiful convocation, convening, and invitation to host the monster. The monster is not the thing with horns or the villain or pathology. The monster is all the intensities in how they move through normalcy, right? It's what I said earlier on, that the normal, what we call normality, is indebted. It owes a debt to this other sidling gesture, this other, I don't want to call it a tiny thing. It's not relative to size at all, but there's this other gesture that makes our world possible, right? And modernity is the practice of pushing away this gesture, of pushing it on the other side and saying, you stay there, right? This is what I think of as the monster. And the monster shows up in all our stories. Folkloric traditions around the world have the monster in some way. Aerin, I'll just wrap up this bit so you can enter into. I'm storing it in a way that still leaves room for what you're saying about the organization of this. So the monster is it shows up in our traditions, in our stories. When I was growing up, you hear stories about don't go to the edge of the forest, because when you go to the forest, that's where you meet a beast, and the beast might ask you a question. And if you don't answer the question, then you're done for. You're dead, right? There was always this idea that the world is stern and that the world is made up of forces that are not controllable. I think that in these times, when all our attempts to fix our problems are only nourishing those problems, we need to go to the edge of the forest. We need to go to those places that our parents warned us not to go, because it made sense not to go there at that time. But we've run out of all our traditions and wisdom traditions. It's now time to experiment and to go to those places for the sake of our siblings around the world, for the sake of our generations, for the sake of new kinds of futures. We need to interact with the more than human in a new way. That's what it means to become monster. I'll just end with this remark by Deleuze. It says, to think is to become monster. So are we really thinking today? Yeah.
The monster took me away.
Yep.
Just came and
You made a face for a long time. You're like this.
I was the monster. Thank you, Bayo, for that. Yeah, I'll be taking that quote. Yeah, to think is to become the monster. So the practical details of this are that from October 30th, so starting this coming Wednesday, through a week from tomorrow, November 3rd, we're going to be in a festival of exploration around different means of navigating and working with and invoking grief, from ritual to dance parties to conversation to a lot of artistic practices. So there'll be tons of creativity and presentations, also performance. And I think, as we've kind of hinted to in this conversation, we are not only talking about the death of other human beings or even other animals in our species or the end of ecosystems. We're also leaning toward and gesturing toward the death of modernity itself. And so drawing on like Vanessa Andreotti's work with hospicing modernity, there's also this sense of, the not edge of the forest is very comfortable for many of us today. For those of us who've been raised and cultured in Western modernity, we have a lot of things that we've grown to become accustomed to and comfortable with and rely on. And so the death of these times, the demise and the kind of collapse of this particular way of being in the world brings with it a lot of pain, because we have to surrender all these comforts. So that's part of the grieving that we're also doing is like, okay, we see that this way of interacting and being in the world probably isn't going to keep us alive for very much longer. Um, and on the other side of that, and I don't know how much you all have explored this element of grief, is the celebration. It's the music, it's the drumming, it's the singing, it's the stomping. Because if we let go of what we've been told by modernity that we are as humans, we may have more space to discover what else we are, you know? So maybe humanity is uh, is something that we can start to let go of as a concept, but wouldn't it be thrilling to kind of find out through lived experience and shared space what else it means to be in these bodies, you know, alive as mammals on this planet. So that's the invitation. Registration is open just for another 2 more days until Monday. So I put the link is there if you want to learn more, and feel so grateful for this space and reconnecting with you, Felice, and your beautiful community that's been woven over these last 4 years of the festival. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for also expanding the invitation for the Becoming Monster. Hopefully I'm going to be there in some of the sessions, and I
Come.
put the link. But yeah, one needs to register so that people can take action until Monday, I heard you say. So please register until Monday if you're interested. There are amazing offerings. Like, it blows my mind because coming into spaces of grief and really expanding the understanding of grief beyond just sorrow and weeping, but bringing all the other aspects of it into the picture is very, very important, I feel. So I'm very grateful that you are creating these spaces to really open our minds about it, and bodies also. So I'm excited about Becoming Monster. And so thank you for this conversation. Before we close, I just want to ask us if we have any, final words and closing remarks about grief and yeah.
I feel like I am leaving this conversation, and I know that language is a barrier, but like so curious about Turkey, Anatolia, and your traditions. And I feel I want to know more about what is alive in the context in which most of you find yourself. I feel like that's the kind of nagging feeling that I'm leaving with, is like wanting to feel more connection to this 57 other people on this call today. So leaving with that kind of unsettledness, but also connection in a sense of like weaving together practices and ideas, and feeling myself how my own experience of grief and death and ways of thinking about it and dancing with it are changing and expanding through conversations like this. Thank you.
Bayo, we don't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Excellent. I will say this, and Aerin, you didn't hear my thanks, but thank you for saying that. But that sorrow is what we feel. Loss is what ignites this conversation. But grief is the field of practice, the ecological field of practice of how loss becomes monster, right?
Mm.
Sorrow is the instigation. We feel loss, it happens. But grief is practice. That's what it means. It's practice. It's ecological practice. It's not our practice. I really don't want to center the human here. I want to push the human to the edges here. It's how furniture, intensity, opportunity, color, ancestrality come together in a particular way to breed new futures. It's how loss becomes monster. We have hitherto learned how to domesticate loss back into recovery, right? We take loss through and sadness through the pit stop of the racetrack, and we get right back in there. We recover. When recovery restores sickness, then we want to do something else. And grief is the playground for that. Grief is how loss becomes monster. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, when I was a younger person, and when I ventured into the world, I met some amazing people in my life. Those people, those encounters, those relationships made me who I am, and I'm still becoming, maybe, you know, influenced by those relationships. And when I think about those people and those encounters, that's what keeps my heart still intact, despite all the horror and the suffering in the world we witness right now. So you are amongst those people, you too. And we have many other beautiful friends who are not trying to save or fix the world, but who are dancing and grieving and celebrating with the world. So I salute you for the amazing work you do, and thank you for gracing us also this evening with this conversation, helping us, our minds, bodies, and hearts. So thank you. I'm grateful. And I look
Yeah,
forward.
we're so lucky. We're really like so blessed to have these relationships. I feel that so deeply. Yeah.
I look forward to playing with you on the playground next week. Coming monster. So thank you for giving us your morning, your night, your sleep, your time, and your beauty. So thank you,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
everyone who has been listening to us. Good night. Much love.